It was just another ordinary Tuesday night in October. David sat in his small apartment, staring at his laptop screen. The blue light made his tired eyes water as he scrolled through social media, seeing all the happy couples and exciting life. Updates from people he barely talked to anymore. At 32, he felt like life was passing him by. His apartment was quiet except for the humming of the old refrigerator in the kitchen. Empty pizza boxes stacked on the counter told the story of too many nights eating alone. David worked as a graphic designer for a small company downtown, creating boring advertisements for local businesses. It wasn't the creative career he had dreamed of in college, but it paid the bills. 3 months ago, his girlfriend Lisa had moved out. She said he was distant, always lost in his own world. Maybe she was right. Since then, David had been going through the motions of daily life without really feeling anything. Work, home, sleep, repeat. The days blended together like watercolors. In the rain. That night, David closed his laptop around 11:30. He brushed his teeth, changed into his old college t-shirt, and crawled into bed. The sheets were cold, and he pulled the blanket up to his chin. Outside his window, the city. Lights flickered like distant stars. He closed his eyes and waited for sleep to take him away from another forgettable day. What happened next would change everything. In his dream, David found himself standing in the most beautiful place he had ever seen. It was a meadow filled with wildflowers that seemed to glow in the golden sunlight. The air smelled sweet, like honey and fresh grass. A gentle breeze touched his face, and he could hear birds singing somewhere in the distance. But what made this dream different wasn't the scenery. It was her. She was sitting on a wooden bench under a large oak tree, reading a book. When she looked up and saw him, she smiled the kind of smile that made his heart skip a beat. She had long, dark hair that caught the light and warm brown eyes that seemed to see right through him. "You look lost," she said, closing her book and patting the space beside her on the bench. Her voice was soft and musical, like wind chimes on a peaceful morning. David walked over, feeling strangely comfortable in this impossible place. "I think I am," he admitted, sitting down next to her. "I don't even know how I got here. Dreams have their own rules," she said simply. "I'm Isabella, by the way." "David," he replied, and when she shook his hand, he could actually feel the warmth of her skin. In most dreams, touch felt fuzzy and unclear, but this felt completely real. They talked for what seemed like hours. Isabella asked him about his art, somehow knowing he was creative even though he hadn't mentioned it. She listened with genuine interest as he told her about his childhood dreams of becoming a famous artist, and how those dreams had slowly faded into a practical career that left him feeling empty. "What happened to that little boy who wanted to paint the world?" she asked gently. David found himself opening up in ways he hadn't in years. He told her about the fear that had crept into his life. The fear of failing, of not being good enough, of taking risks. He talked about how he had chosen safety over passion, and how that choice had left him feeling like he was sleepwalking through life. Isabella listened without judgment. When he finished talking, she was quiet for a moment, then said, "You know, sometimes we have to get lost before we can find our way back to who we really are." The meadow round them seemed to shimmer as she spoke, and David noticed that the light was starting to change. The golden was fading, and he felt a strange pulling sensation, like he was being drawn away from this peaceful place. "I don't want to leave," he said, surprised by the sadness in his own voice. Isabella smiled again, and this time there was something mysterious in her expression. "Don't worry, we'll see each other again soon." Then everything went black. David woke up in his bed. But something was different. Usually, dreams faded within minutes of waking up, leaving only vague impressions and scattered images. But this dream stayed with him, crystal clear and vivid. He could still smell the sweetness of the meadow air, still feel the warmth of Isabella's hand when she had shaken his. He sat up in bed, looking around his familiar bedroom. The digital clock on his nightstand read 6:47 a.m. His alarm wasn't set to go off for another hour, but he was completely awake, his mind racing with memories of the dream. David got out of bed and walked to his desk, where he kept his old sketchbook buried under a pile of work papers. He hadn't drawn anything for pleasure in months, but now he felt an urgent need to capture Isabella's face before the memory faded. His hand moved across the paper with surprising confidence, creating lines and shadows that brought her image to life as he drew. He marveled at how clearly he could remember every detail. The way her hair fell across her shoulder, the exact shape of her eyes, the gentle curve of her smile. When he finished the sketch, David stared at it in amazement. It was some of the best work he had done in years. But more than that, looking at the drawing brought back the feeling of peace and connection he had experienced in the dream. Throughout that day at work, David found himself thinking about Isabella. While he created boring banner ads for a car dealership, his mind wandered back to the meadow and their conversation. He felt lighter somehow, as if a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. His co-workers noticed the change. "You seem different today," said Jenny from accounting. "More, I don't know, alive?" David just smiled and shrugged. How could he explain that he had met someone amazing in a dream? They would think he was losing his mind. That evening, David found himself actually excited about going to sleep. He had never looked forward to bedtime before, but now he couldn't wait to close his eyes and see if Isabella would be there waiting for him. As he lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, David wondered if he was going crazy. Normal people didn't have dreams this vivid, this real. Normal people didn't sketch strangers from their dreams with perfect accuracy. But as he drifted off to sleep, he decided he didn't care if he was losing his mind. For the first time in months, he felt truly alive. The last thing he remembered before sleep took him was the sound of Isabella's laughter, echoing softly in his memory like a promise of something wonderful to come. The next night, David practically ran to his bedroom. He had spent the entire day thinking about Isabella and wondering if she would appear again. Part of him worried that the dream had been a wartime thing, just his mind playing tricks on him. But another part of him felt certain that something special was happening. He lay in bed, closing his eyes and trying to relax. At first, nothing happened. He tossed and turned, checking the clock every few minutes. Midnight came and went, then 1 o'clock. David started to feel foolish. What was he doing? Waiting for a dream person like she was real. But then, just as he was about to give up hope, he found himself somewhere new. This time, he was standing in a cozy library. Tall wooden shelves reached toward the ceiling, filled with books of every size and color. Soft lamplight created warm pools of yellow light throughout the room. The air smelled like old paper and leather, comfortable and familiar. "I was wondering when you get here," came a voice he had been hoping to hear all day. David turned around, and there she was, Isabella, sitting in a big armchair by the fireplace. She looked exactly as he remembered, but somehow even more beautiful. She was wearing a simple blue dress and had her legs tucked under her. As she read, "You were waiting for me?" David asked, walking over to where she sat. "Of course," Isabella said, smiling as she closed her book. "I told you we'd see each other again." David sat down in the chair across from her, still amazed by how real everything felt. He could hear the fire crackling, could feel the warmth on his face. When he reached out to touch the arm of his chair, the fabric felt soft and worn, exactly like real velvet. "This is incredible," he said, looking round the library. "Yesterday you were in a meadow, and now we're here. How does this work?" Isabella laughed, and the sound filled the quiet library like music. "Dreams don't follow the same rules as the waking world. We can be anywhere, anytime. The important thing isn't where we are, but that we're together." They talked for hours, or at least it felt like hours. Isabella asked him about his day, and David found himself telling her things he had never shared with anyone. He told her about how he used to love reading when he was a child, how he would spend entire weekends lost in adventure stories and fantasy novels. "What happened to that love?" Isabella asked gently. "I guess I grew up," David said with a sad smile. "Adult life got in the way. Work, bills, responsibilities. I stopped making time for the things that made me happy." But you're still that same person inside, Isabella said. The boy who loved stories and dreamed of adventures. He's still there, just waiting for you to remember him. As they talked, David noticed something strange. Isabella seemed to know things about him that he was sure he hadn't mentioned. She asked about his old art teacher, Mrs. Peterson, who had encouraged him to pursue his creativity. She mentioned his childhood dog, Buddy, who had died when David was 15. How do you know about these things? David asked, feeling a mix of wonder and confusion. Isabella's expression became thoughtful. Sometimes, when people connect on a deep level, information flows between them in ways that can't be explained. It's like tuning into the same radio station. The fire in the fireplace began to dim, and David felt that familiar pulling sensation again. He was waking up. Wait, he said, reaching toward Isabella. I have so many questions, and I have so many answers, she replied. But not all at once. Some things take time to understand. Will you be here tomorrow night? David asked, feeling desperate not to lose this connection. I'll be here whenever you need me, Isabella promised. Just remember, David, your dreams are trying to tell you something important. Pay attention. Then the library faded away, and David was back in his bed, staring at the ceiling in the early morning light. Over the next few weeks, the pattern continued. Isabella appeared in his dreams 3 or 4 times a week, always in different places. One night they walked along a moonlit beach, talking about his fears and hopes. Another night they sat at a small cafe, sharing stories over coffee that tasted better than anything he had ever experienced in real life. Each dream felt more real than the last. David began to look forward to sleep more than being awake. His waking hours felt gray and flat compared to the vibrant world he shared with Isabella. His coworkers started to notice changes in him. He smiled more often, seemed more creative in his work, and even started bringing his old sketchbook to the office during lunch breaks. Instead of scrolling through his phone, he would draw scenes from his dreams. You're different lately, his friend Tom said one day, in a good way. It's like you found something that was missing. David just nodded, not sure how to explain what was happening to him. How could he tell Tom that he was falling in love with someone who only existed in his dreams? Because that's what was happening. With each dream, David felt more connected to Isabella. She understood him in ways that no one in his waking life ever had. She listened without judgment, offered wisdom without preaching, and made him feel like the most interesting person in the world. One night, as they sat together on a park bench watching the sunset, David decided to test something that had been bothering him. Isabella, he said carefully, can you tell me something about a place I've never been? Something specific that I could check when I wake up? Isabella looked at him with those warm brown eyes, and for a moment, he thought she might not answer. Then she smiled. There's a little bookstore in Seattle, she said, on Pine Street. It has a bright green door with a brass handle shaped like a key. Inside, there's an orange cat named Hemingway who sleeps on the counter. The owner is an elderly woman named Mrs. Chen who always wears colorful scarves. How do you know this? David asked. There are many things in this world that can't be explained. Isabella said softly, sometimes you just have to trust that some connections go deeper than logic. David woke up the next morning with Isabella's words echoing in his mind. He had never been to Seattle, had no reason to know about any bookstore there, but somehow he felt certain that if he ever found himself in that city, he would find exactly what Isabella had described. The dreams were becoming more than just pleasant escapes. They were changing him, helping him rediscover parts of himself that he had forgotten existed. David began to wonder if Isabella was more than just a creation of his imagination. But even if she wasn't real in the traditional sense, the feelings she inspired in him certainly were. For the first time in years, David felt truly alive, and it was all because of a woman who visited him in his dreams. December arrived with cold rain and gray skies. David had been dreaming of Isabella for almost 2 months now, and their connection felt stronger than ever. But there was something that kept bothering him about their last conversation. The bookstore in Seattle with the green door and the cat named Hemingway. He couldn't shake the feeling that he needed to find out if it was real. When his sister called to invite him for Christmas, David learned she had moved to Seattle for a new job. It felt like fate was giving him a sign. He booked a flight for Christmas week, telling his sister he was excited to see her new city. But secretly, he had other plans. The flight to Seattle felt endless. David stared out the window at the clouds below, wondering if he was losing his mind. What kind of person travels across the country to look for a bookstore from a dream? But he had to know. The not knowing was driving him crazy. His sister picked him up at the airport, chattering excitedly about her new apartment and job. David smiled and nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. He had memorized every detail Isabella had given him. Pine Street, green door, brass handles shaped like a key, orange cat named Hemingway, Mrs. Chen with colorful scarves, on Christmas Eve. While his sister was at work, David found himself walking down Pine Street. His heart was pounding as he searched each storefront. Part of him hoped he wouldn't find anything, because that would mean he was still sane. But another part of him desperately wanted the bookstore to be real. Then he saw it. A small bookstore squeezed between a coffee shop and a vintage clothing store. The door was painted bright green, just like Isabella had said. David walked closer, his hands shaking slightly. The brass handle was indeed shaped like a key, worn smooth by countless hands opening and closing the door. David stood there for a full minute, just staring. This was impossible. He had never been to Seattle before. He had no way of knowing about this place. Yet here it was, exactly as Isabella had described. Taking a deep breath, David pushed open the green door. A small bell chimed as he entered, and the smell of old books and coffee filled his nose. The store was cozy and cramped with shelves, reaching to the ceiling and books stacked in every corner. And there, sleeping on the counter in a patch of winter sunlight, was an orange cat. "Can I help you?" came a voice from behind the counter. David looked up to see an elderly woman emerging from the back room. She was small and graceful, with silver hair and kind eyes. Around her neck was a bright purple scarf decorated with golden threads. "I'm just looking," David managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. "Well, take your time," the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Mrs. Chen, the owner, and this lazy fellow is Hemingway." She gestured to the cat, who opened one eye, looked at David, and went back to sleep. David felt like the world was spinning around him. Everything was exactly as Isabella had described. Every single detail was perfect. This wasn't a coincidence. This was impossible. "Are you all right, dear?" Mrs. Chen asked, looking concerned. "You look like you've seen a ghost." David realized he was staring at her with his mouth open. "I'm sorry. It's just, this is going to sound crazy, but someone described your store to me. Described it perfectly. The green door, Hemingway, even your scarf." Mrs. Chen raised an eyebrow. "Really? That's interesting. Not many people know about this little place unless they've been here before. Who told you about us?" David pulled out his phone and showed her the sketch he had drawn of Isabella. "This woman. Her name is Isabella. She told me about your store in incredible detail." Mrs. Chen took the phone and studied the drawing carefully. Her expression changed, and she looked up at David with surprise and something else, fear, maybe. "Where did you get this picture?" she asked quietly. "I drew it," David said, "from memory. I know this sounds insane, but I've been dreaming about her for months." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the sketch. Then she walked over to an old filing cabinet behind the counter and pulled out a thick photo album. She flipped through several pages before stopping at one particular photo. "Is this your Isabella?" she asked, turning the album toward David. David's blood went cold. There, in a faded photograph from what looked like the 1980s, was Isabella. She was younger, maybe in her early 20s, but it was definitely her. Same dark hair, same warm brown eyes, same gentle smile. "That's her," David whispered. "That's exactly her." "Who is she?" Mrs. Chen closed the album and looked at David with a mixture of sadness and wonder. "Her name was Isabella Rodriguez. She was one of my regular customers back in the late 80s. She came in here almost every week, always looking for books about dreams and spirituality. She was an artist, a painter. Very talented, very kind. Was? David asked, though he already knew what Mrs. Chen was going to say. She died in a car accident in 1989, Mrs. Chen said softly. She was only 26. It was very sad. She had so much life ahead of her. David felt like the floor was falling out from under him. That's impossible. I was born in 1991. I've been talking to her, having conversations with her. She knows things about my life, about me. Mrs. Chen studied his face carefully. You're not the first person to come here asking about Isabella, she said quietly. Over the years, maybe 4 or 5 people have come in with drawings or descriptions of her. All of them said they dreamed about her. What did you tell them? David asked. The same thing I'm telling you. Isabella believed that connections between souls don't end with death. She used to say that love and understanding could bridge any gap, even the gap between life and death. David sank into a chair near the window, his mind reeling. Isabella was dead, had been dead for over 30 years, before he was even born. But he had been talking to her, laughing with her, falling in love with her. I know this is hard to accept, Mrs. Chen said gently. But maybe Isabella is trying to help you somehow. She always wanted to help people find their way. That night, David lay in bed in his sister's guest room, staring at the ceiling. He was afraid to fall asleep, afraid of what he might find in his dreams. If Isabella was really dead, what did that make their relationship? What did that make him? But when sleep finally came, Isabella wasn't there. For the first time in months, David's dreams were empty and dark. He woke up feeling more alone than he had ever felt in his life. The next few days passed in a blur. David flew back home, but he felt like he was sleepwalking through his life. He kept thinking about Mrs. Chen's words about the other people who had dreamed of Isabella. He spent hours online, researching Isabella Rodriguez, finding old newspaper articles about her accident, her art exhibitions, her life cut short. Everything he found matched what he knew about his Isabella, her love of books, her artistic nature, her gentle wisdom. But she was gone, had been gone for decades. For a week, David's dreams remained empty. No Isabella, no magical places, no conversations that made him feel understood and alive. Just regular, forgettable dreams that faded as soon as he woke up. David began to wonder if he was losing his mind. Had he imagined all of it? But the bookstore in Seattle was real. Mrs. Chen was real. The photograph was real. Isabella had been real, just not in the way he had thought. As he lay in bed on New Year's Eve, David whispered into the darkness, Isabella, if you're really there, if this is all real, please come back. I need to understand what's happening to me. But the night remained silent, and David fell asleep to the sound of fireworks in the distance, wondering if the most beautiful thing that had ever happened to him was over before he even understood what it was. 3 weeks passed without Isabella, 3 weeks of empty dreams and restless nights. David felt like half of himself was missing. He went through his daily routine like a robot, but inside he was falling apart. The discovery in Seattle had shaken him to his core, and Isabella's sudden absence felt like losing someone he loved all over again. David threw himself into research, spending hours online reading about dreams, the afterlife, and spiritual connections. He found stories of other people who claimed to have communicated with those who had passed away, but nothing that felt quite like his experience with Isabella. He also started painting again. For the first time in years, David set up an easel in his apartment and began creating art. But every painting was of Isabella, her face, the places they had visited together in dreams, the emotions he felt when he was with her. The paintings were beautiful, but they made him feel even more lonely. Then, on a cold February night, everything changed. David was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and wondering if he would ever see Isabella again, when suddenly he felt that familiar shift in consciousness. The world around him began to blur and reshape itself. He found himself standing in the original meadow where They had first met, but something was different. The colors seemed less vivid, and there was a strange quality to the light, like looking through frosted glass. David. He turned around, and there she was. Isabella stood under the same oak tree, but she looked different, too. She seemed more transparent, like a photograph that had been overexposed. Her smile was the same, but there was something sad in her eyes. Isabella. David ran toward her, but stopped when he saw her hold up her hand. I know you're confused, she said gently. I know you went to Seattle. I know you found out about who I was. You're dead, David said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. You died before I was even born. How is this possible? Isabella walked closer, and David could see that she was indeed different. She moved like someone walking through water, and her edges seemed to shimmer slightly. Death isn't the end that most people think it is, she said. It's more like moving to a different room in the same house, sometimes. When the connection is strong enough, we can still visit the rooms we used to live in. But why me? David asked. Why did you choose me? Isabella's expression grew thoughtful. I didn't choose you, David. You called to me. Your heart was so full of sadness and longing that it created a bridge between our worlds. I felt your pain, and I wanted to help. They sat down on the grass, and David noticed that he couldn't feel the ground beneath him as clearly as before. Everything in this dream felt less solid, more fragile. When I was alive, Isabella continued, I was an artist, just like you. I know what it feels like to have creativity burning inside you, but being too scared to let it out. I know what it's like to feel disconnected from the world around you. So you've been helping me. David said, understanding beginning to dawn. Double quotes, yes, but not in the way you might think. I can't fix your problems or make your life perfect. All I can do is remind you of who you really are. The healing, the growth, the courage to change, that all comes from you. Over the next few months, Isabella began visiting David's dreams again, but less frequently. Sometimes a week would pass between visits, sometimes weeks, each time she appeared. She seemed a little more distant, a little more ethereal. But David was changing in his waking life. He quit his boring job and started freelancing as an artist. He began taking painting classes and joined an art group that met every weekend. For the first time in years, he felt like he was living instead of just existing. He also started dating. Again, he met a woman named Victoria at his art class. She was a therapist who specialized in helping people deal with grief and loss. When David eventually told her about his dreams of Isabella, Victoria didn't laugh or think he was crazy. Grief and healing can take many forms, she said thoughtfully. Sometimes our minds create exactly what we need to help us grow. Whether Isabella is real or not isn't as important as how she's helped you find yourself again. David appreciated Victoria's understanding, but he knew Isabella was more than just his imagination. The bookstore in Seattle was proof of that. Mrs. Chen's photograph was proof of that. But he also understood that it didn't matter whether other people believed him or not. One night in late spring, Isabella appeared in his dreams looking more solid and real than she had in months. They were back in the library where they had spent so many hours talking. You're doing so well, she said, smiling at him with pride. Look at how much you've grown. I couldn't have done it without you. David said. Double quotes, yes. You could have, Isabella replied. You just needed someone to remind you of your own strength. That's all I ever did. David looked around the library, memorizing every detail. He had a feeling this might be one of their last conversations. Are you leaving? He asked. Not leaving, Isabella said. Just stepping back. You don't need me the way you used to. You're strong enough now to help yourself. But I'll miss you, David said, feeling tears in his eyes. I'll always be a part of you. Isabella said, every time you pick up a paintbrush, every time you choose courage over fear, every time you help someone else find their way, I'll be there. She stood up and walked over to David, placing her hand on his heart. He could barely feel the touch, but the warmth of it filled his entire being. Thank you, she whispered. Helping you has helped me too. I've been holding on to this world for so long, trying to help others the way I wished someone had helped me. But now I think it's time for me to let go and move on to whatever comes next. David wanted to argue, to ask her to stay, but he understood. Isabella had her own journey to complete, and he had been just one stop along the way. Will I ever see you again? He asked. Maybe, Isabella said with a mysterious smile. Love never really dies, David. It just changes form. The library began to fade around them. But instead of the usual abrupt awakening, David felt a gentle transition back to consciousness. He woke up in his bed feeling sad but also strangely peaceful. That morning, David started a new painting. It wasn't of Isabella this time, but of the sunrise outside his window. It was the first painting he had done that looked toward the future instead of the past. As he worked, he felt Isabella's presence one last time, like a gentle hand on his shoulder, encouraging him to keep creating, keep growing, keep living. Then even that feeling faded, leaving David with only the warm memories of their time together, and the knowledge that he was finally ready to face life on his own. 6 months had passed since Isabella's final visit. David's life had transformed in ways he never thought possible. His small apartment was now filled with paintings, canvases, and art supplies. The walls that once held nothing but bland posters now displayed his own artwork, landscapes, portraits, and abstract pieces that seemed to glow with inner light. The spare bedroom had been converted into a proper art studio. David spent his evenings there, creating pieces that galleries around the city were beginning to notice. His art had a unique quality that people couldn't quite put their finger on. There was something otherworldly about it, something that made viewers feel like they were looking into another dimension. His relationship with Victoria had grown deeper and more meaningful. She understood his creative process and never questioned the strange inspiration behind his work. Sometimes she would sit in his studio while he painted, reading a book or just watching him work. Her presence was calming and grounding in a way that balanced the ethereal quality of his art. You've changed so much since I first met you, Victoria said one evening as they sat together on his couch. You seem more complete now. David nodded, thinking about how different he felt from the lonely, lost man he had been a year ago. I feel like I finally know who I am, he said, like I found the missing piece of myself. He still thought about Isabella often, but the sadness had faded into something warmer, gratitude, maybe, or a peaceful kind of love that didn't need anything in return. Sometimes he would catch himself smiling while painting, remembering something she had said or the way she had encouraged him to be brave. David's art career was taking off in ways he had never imagined. A small gallery downtown had given him his first solo exhibition. He called it Dreams and Connections and filled it with the paintings he had created over the past year. Many were inspired by his time with Isabella, though he kept that part of the story to himself. The opening night was packed with people. David stood in the corner, watching strangers examine his work and discuss it in hushed, reverent tones. He felt proud but also slightly overwhelmed. This was everything he had dreamed of as a young man, but he had never expected it to feel quite like this. The artist has an incredible ability to capture emotion. He overheard one woman say to her companion, "Look at this piece. It's like he's painted the feeling of being understood." David smiled, thinking Isabella would have loved that comment. She had always been so interested in how art could communicate feelings that words couldn't express. As the evening wound down, David found himself standing in front of his favorite painting from the series. It showed a figure sitting by a window, looking out at a starry sky. The person's face wasn't visible, but somehow the painting conveyed a sense of peace and acceptance. "It's beautiful," came a voice beside him. David turned to see an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. He was probably in his 70s, with silver hair and paint-stained fingers that marked him as a fellow artist. "Thank you," David said. "This one is special to me. I can tell," the man replied. "There's something about your work that reminds me of someone I used to know, a young woman who painted in the 80s. She had the same ability to capture the invisible connections between people." David's heart skipped a beat. "What was her name?" "Isabella Rodriguez," the man said. "She was incredibly talented, but she died far too young." I always wondered what she might have accomplished if she had lived longer. David stared at the man, feeling that familiar chill he had experienced in the bookstore in Seattle. Did you know her well? We were friends, the man said, both struggling artists trying to make our way in the world. She used to say that art was a way of building bridges between souls, of helping people feel less alone in the universe. That sounds like something she would say. David murmured. The man looked at him curiously. You speak as if you knew her. David hesitated, then decided to take a chance. In a way, I did. She visited me in dreams for several months. She helped me find my way back to art, instead of laughing or looking skeptical. The man nodded slowly. That sounds exactly like something Isabella would do. She always wanted to help other artists find their voice. They talked for another hour, sharing stories about Isabella and art and the mysterious ways that inspiration finds us. When the man finally left, he shook David's hand and said, I think Isabella would be very proud of what you've accomplished. That night, David lay in bed thinking about the conversation. He hadn't dreamed of Isabella in months, but he felt her presence more strongly than ever, not as a visitor from another world, but as a part of himself that would always be there. His dreams at night were peaceful and ordinary, but when he woke up, he felt refreshed and ready for the day ahead. He had coffee with Victoria, worked on a new painting, and spent the afternoon walking through the city, sketching people and scenes that caught his eye. This was his life now, real, grounded, connected to the world around him. He was no longer waiting for something to happen or someone to save him. He was living fully, creating boldly, and loving openly. A few weeks later, David received an email that made his heart race. A major gallery in New York wanted to feature his work in a group exhibition. It was the kind of opportunity that could change everything for his career. That night, he sat in his studio, staring at a blank canvas. He closed his eyes and let his mind wander, thinking about the journey that had brought him to this moment. He thought about the lonely man he had been, the mysterious woman who had helped him find himself, and the artist he had become. When he opened his eyes, he began to paint this time. He painted from pure inspiration, not from memory or dreams, but from the joy and gratitude that filled his heart. The painting that emerged was unlike anything he had created before. It showed a figure stepping through a doorway from darkness into light, with ghostly hands pushing gently from behind. He knew it was his masterpiece, and he knew exactly what he would call it, the bridge. As he put the finishing touches on the painting, David felt a warmth in the studio that reminded him of Isabella's presence. But this time, he realized the warmth wasn't coming from outside himself. It was coming from within, from the confidence and creativity that she had helped him discover. David stepped back from the canvas and smiled. He was ready for whatever came next. He was ready to build his own bridges, to help others find their way, and to live the life he had always been meant to live. In the distance, he could have sworn he heard the faint sound of laughter, warm and musical, carried on the evening breeze. But when he listened more carefully, he realized it was just the sound of his own joy. Finally set free, the story of David and Isabella was complete. But David's own story was just beginning, and for the first time in his life, he couldn't wait to see what the next chapter would bring.